Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be setting up my April reading journal. Before I start setting up those spreads, I will go over all of my annual reading trackers. First up is my bookshelfie, and this is where I'll color in how many books I read for that month, and each month is a different Tombow color. For the month of April, I'm using the shade 942, which is just like a light beige. After I color in the book spines, I'll go in and write the titles for those books that I read. In April, I read a total of 5 books, which brings my total for the year all the way up to 28 books. This next spread is my Goodreads goal tracker, and this is where I'll color in those 5 books. My goal for the year is 54 books, but I always end up reading more than that, so I always give myself some pat in the back once I hit more than 54 books. The next one is my A to Z challenge or my alphabet challenge, and for the month of April I only read one new letter, which was the letter M, and the book I read for that was The Mountains Sing. For book bingo, I completed one new prompt, and that was O2, which is a book featuring food or cooking, and The Secret of Orange Blossom Cake was basically made for that prompt. Read the Rainbow didn't get any new colors this month, which is fine, some months are just like that. Now for the buzzword reading cover challenge, I got one new prompt checked off, and that was Border or Frame, which also went to The Secret of Orange Blossom Cake. That little book was such an overachiever this month. I also had a funny realization. I had actually completed this prompt a while back and completely forgotten to mark it off, so that was a nice little surprise when I was updating my tracker. I also knocked out one new prompt in the buzzword reading challenge. First, They Killed My Father could have technically counted for 2 different prompts, either ordinal numbers or me and my, but I decided to use it only for ordinal numbers, just to keep things tidy. In series news, I started 2 brand new ones this month, the Heart series and the Daughter of Cambodia series. And I'm excited to see where both of those go. Although knowing me, I'll probably never get to finish them. Only one book this month came off my physical TBR. My TBR shelf is basically decorative at this point. I've made my peace with that. Now for my Hall of Fame this month, I had 2 5-star reads. The Camino and First I Killed My Father both earned a spot in my Hall of Fame, and they absolutely deserve it. I did have one 4.5 star, but I felt like it wasn't a full 5 star, so I did not deserve the Hall of Fame spot, so I left it out. Next spread is my ARCs tracker, and I did manage to read 2 books from my ARCs tracker list. And lastly, it's my social media growth tracker, and my YouTube channel crossed over to 4,200 followers, and I was very happy to see it. So every single one of you that watches, comments, likes, or just quietly hangs out in the background, thank you so much. This little corner of the internet means everything to me, and it's because of you. Okay, so now it's time to set up my actual April cover page. So this month, I subscribed to the Paperminty Studio sticker subscription. And you guys, the stickers were absolutely adorable. The second I saw them, I just knew they were going to be the heart of the spread. And then she also dropped her latest collection, which included a pet tape with alphabet letters all over it, and I immediately knew I wanted to use it for my month title. It just felt so perfect. So the entire cover page for the month of April is basically courtesy of Paperminty Studio. And this is not sponsored or anything. I bought everything out of my own pocket. I really loved this latest collection of hers. I also picked up the Meadow Library set, and oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. My only tiny complaint, and this is such a me problem, but is that each roll only has about 3 unique loops. The rolls themselves are huge, don't get me wrong, but I wish I had at least 5 loops to work with. I kind of want to go back and buy a second roll, honestly. Lesson learned, always buy 2 of this. On a totally related note, I've been using these sticker storage books from JournalSay to organize all of my PT tape, and it has been such a game changer. Being able to see the full loops without having to roll everything out every single time is just chef's kiss. It took me forever to cut through all of my PET tapes to get them in there, but I'm about 90% done now, and it was absolutely worth it. Alright, let's talk stats because April was a really fun reading month. I finished 5 books this month, and all 5 were written by female authors, which I always love to see. My authors were wonderfully international too. I read 1 author from each from the Netherlands, Vietnam, and Cambodia, and 2 from the USA. Genre-wise, April was all over the place. I had historical fiction, memoir, romance, thriller, and dystopian. A little bit of everything. One of my reads was nonfiction and the rest were fiction. For formats, 3 were audiobooks and 2 were ebooks, and all 5 were adult reads with no LGBTQ+ representation this month. Rating breakdown, I had 1 3.5 star read, which I rounded down to 3 stars for my star rating tracker chart, 1 4-star, and 1 4.5 stars, which I also rounded down to 4 stars since it wasn't a full 5-star, and then 2 glorious 5-star reads. So, not a bad month at all. This was my cover page for the month of April. The first book I read for April was The Mountains Sing, and this was also my pick for our historical fiction book club, and it was an amazing read. The novel follows 2 narrators, Tran Julan, born in 1920 into a prosperous farming family, and her granddaughter, Huang, a child of the 1960s, growing up in Hanoi, while her parents are off fighting in a war she can barely wrap her head around. The chapters alternate between their two voices, moving through almost a full century of Vietnamese history, and honestly, what could have felt messy or hard to follow is actually one of the book's greatest strengths. Each narrator is so distinctly herself that you never lose your footing. Yulan carries the weight of her lived history. Huang carries the confusion of a child trying to make sense of a world she never asked for. And the history this family moves through, French colonialism, Japanese occupation, the Great Famine, land reform that turned neighbors into informants, and then 40 years of war that split the country and fractured everything in it. Kemai does not soften any of this. Famine, torture, sexual violence, the particular cruelty of ideological fervor is all there. One of the novel's quieter, more devastating arguments is that it doesn't matter which flag the violence comes under. Dead is still dead. That line just sat with me. But here's what I love most about the book. It holds tenderness right alongside all of that brutality, and the balance never once feels forced. The Tran family loves fiercely and without condition, and when that love isn't enough, strangers step in and are addressed with the same familial titles as blood, sister, brother, because that's just how people survive together. War brings out the lowest and the highest in people, and Kemai earns the right to show us both. This is the kind of novel that stays with you not because it's easy, but because it insists on being honest. If you want to understand 20th century Vietnam through something other than the American perspective, this is essential reading. Now for this spread, I used distress ink to vintage out the sides of the page, and then I used the sticker book from Journal Say for all of the folly leaves landscape. The girl in the window is from Paperminty Studio, as well as the leaves at the top. And then I just used my favorite alphabet stamps to stamp out the name of the book. I loved how this spread came together. The next book I read is The Secret of Orange Blossom Cake by Rachel Linden. I read this one for another book club as well, and I didn't realize that the author is actually local to me, so apparently we're going to be hosting her in our next book club, so I'm excited to meet her in person. The premise of this book alone had me. Lake Garda in summer, a magical cookbook that reveals its recipes one by one, a Nonna who absolutely knows she is the best character in the book, and a childhood sweetheart who grew up to be annoyingly perfect. Rachel Linden had me at the pitch and delivered on almost all of it. The setting is transporting. The lakeside market, the olive farm, the homemade pasta and gelato woven through every single chapter. I was ready to book a one-way ticket before I even hit page 50. And the magical cookbook at the center of the story is exactly the kind of whimsy I live for in this genre. Just grounded enough to feel meaningful, just enchanting enough to keep you turning pages. Nonna Bruna is an absolute force of nature. She carries this entire book on her tiny 80-year-old shoulders, and she knows it. And then there's another side character named Alex who has this quiet emotional arc about learning that love and belonging aren't conditional on a last name. And honestly, that hit harder than I expected. But then there's the main character, Jules, and she was the most frustrating character I've read in a while. I spent 230-something pages watching this woman be surrounded by sun-drenched Italian beauty, a devoted grandmother, a found family healing old wounds, and the man who is steady and warm and gorgeous by all accounts, and she still needed to think about it. I can cannot stress enough how little Seattle is offering her in return. A Trader Joe's commute and roommates she doesn't even like. Like, babe, please, shut up. Like, just, I don't know. It was very aggravating. It was frustrating, that's for sure. But if you step aside the main character, I guess, this is a warm, charming, food-soaked, hallmark dream of a book, and if you can make peace with the main character's choices faster than I did, you will probably round up to 5 stars without hesitation. But like, seriously, this deserves to be a Netflix movie. I would totally watch it. It was so cute. Now for this spread, I had this gorgeous scrapbooking paper, which is all about oranges and lemons and, Greek and Italy vibes. And so I thought it would be perfect as a background for my review. But then I needed an actual place to write my review. So I cut some sticker paper, and this is just plain white sticker paper. I also had this beautiful edge cutter that I bought at my local Michael's, and it creates kind of like scallop edges. It took me a little bit to get the hang of it, but then I decided to just like do the whole page. And I love how cute the scallop edges are, so I think I'm going to be using that more going forward. The next book I read was First They Killed My Father, and this is a memoir. It was a very difficult read, and after I finished it, I was kind of just sitting there trying to figure out how to even talk about this book, and I'm honestly still not entirely sure I can even do it justice, but I'm gonna try. Long Ung was 5 years old when the Khmer Rouge forced her family out of their home in Phnom Penh. 5 years old. And she writes this memoir through the eyes of that child, not through the wisdom of hindsight, not with political framing or historical distance, but from the inside the confusion of a little girl who doesn't fully understand why her world has collapsed. The choice is what makes this book so utterly devastating. There's no buffer. You're not reading about the genocide, you're inside it. A child hide, experiencing it as fragments of fear and hunger and love. Her family was separated, people died, and Long, somewhere between 5 and 9 years old, did things to survive that no child should ever have to do. Things I still can't fully process as an adult sitting here reading about them. What stays with me is how the book handles love. In the middle of all that brutality, it's the small gestures, a hand held, a meal shared, a sibling's face remembered, that feel like acts of defiance. We in the Western world have a habit of looking away from atrocities, or finding ways to make them abstract enough to be comfortable. This book refuses to let you do that. It's essential reading precisely because it's so hard. The next book I read is The Camino, and first a huge thank you to Simon Books for the ARC. I am so grateful. I picked up The Camino knowing it would be a grief story wrapped around the way of St. James, and I thought I was prepared for that. I was not even a little bit. Lotte Bonnet is a chocolatier living a quietly happy life in South Limburg with her husband Emil, a Bosnian refugee, and their 2 sons. When Emil dies by suicide while walking the Camino de Santiago, Lotte is left not only with grief but with questions that grow darker the closer she looks. A year later, she retraces his exact path through central France, forming new friendships and perhaps something a little more romantic along the way, all while a figure trails her steps and the truth about who Emil really was begins to surface. This book operates simultaneously as a literary grief novel, a historical thriller, and a meditation on how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary violence. The Bosnian conflict is woven in with such care and specificity that whole sections read like essential history. And crucially, Nivera never reduces anyone to a symbol. She traces the long, tangled roots of the war without assigning simple blame, which makes the revelations about Emil land with real moral weight. And I want to get a little personal here for a second because this book hit me somewhere very specific. Growing up in Albania in the 90s, I witnessed the edges of this conflict as a child without understanding it. I didn't understand why the Serbs hated us so much. I didn't understand why my people had to march away from their homes. I didn't understand why so many people had to die. This book gave me a framework I didn't know I needed. And the novel's unflinching look at how populism, disinformation, and manufactured group identity creates the conditions for atrocity feels as urgent as any other headline today. For this spread, I used the Distress ink again to darken out the edges and make it a little bit more vintagey feeling. And then I used the same sticker book from Journal Say as earlier with the foliage landscape. And then the girl camping, that is from Being Faye, an Instagram account. I really like her style actually, but I haven't bought anything from her in a long time. So this is like a very old pet tape. And then the top, those are from the washi tape shop. The last book I read in April is Daggermouth by H.M. Wolf, and a huge thank you to Scarlet Press for the arc. Wolf has built a dystopian world that is viscerally easy to hate. You found Haven, a city carved into rings of privilege and poverty, ruled by a masked elite obsessed with control and surveillance. It's the kind of regime that weaponizes marriage, monitors every move, and crushes anyone who doesn't fit neatly into its hierarchy of wealth. The world building is sharp and specific, and the oppressive atmosphere never lets up for a single second. But the real engine of this book is Shadera and Grayson. And I want to be very clear, this is not a watered down enemies to lovers situation. These two actively try to kill each other, and they have deeply personal reasons to do so. Their forced marriage is less a romance premise and more a detonation waiting to happen. Two morally gray people, each layered with different forms of trauma, locked together in a luxury apartment with nothing but vodka and seething tension. It's Mr. and Mrs. Smith if both parties truly deeply despise each other, and Wolf commits to that enmity completely. Shadira is feral and fierce, a mercenary who takes absolutely zero prisoners and gives Grayson zero grace. And Grayson, the tortured second son with crumbling control and so much buried pain. I have emotional damage thinking about him, and I mean that. My only real wish for the book is for a few more quieter moments between them. The relationship develops at a pace that left me wanting just a little bit more romantic depth before the ending launched into full chaos mode. But that final act absolutely delivered, and I need book 2 immediately, like yesterday. If you want your enemies to lovers dark, political, and completely unhinged, this one is for you. Now for this spread, I did a lot of searching on Pinterest about tattoos that had like a dagger and a skull and some flowers. And I found this image that looked perfect, and so I wanted to replicate it in my journal. The skull is an important symbol in the book itself, and so I thought it was fitting to have it in the main image of the spread as well. Now I left some space by the sides of the image because I wanted to create some kind of a bladder splatter. And if you look at the cover for this book, it's primarily like black with hints of red. And so I had this fountain pen ink that I used, and I think this is Jacobin Rouge Grenade, and it's a reddish ink, and I thought it would look cool as a blood splatter. And so I poured some of it in this plastic wrap, and I was hoping this wouldn't bleed through on the other page, but unfortunately it did bleed through, and it kind of ruined a little bit my Camino spread, which I was a little bit upset. But I don't know. I didn't like the blood splatters at first, but now that the more I look at it, the more I'm glad that I did go with the blood splatters because it looks cool. But again, I'm kind of disappointed that the ink bled through. And I tend to use a lot of fountain pens in my journaling, and I have noticed that the Tifosi paper is just not as good of a notebook paper for handling fountain pens as, let's say, Archer and Olive is. So for my second half of the year, I will definitely be switching back to an Archer and Olive journal. And that is a wrap on my April reading journal. If you made it this far, you already know what to do. Give this video a thumbs up, leave me a comment down below telling me what you read in April, and subscribe if you haven't already so you never miss a new video. As always, happy reading and happy journaling.